It was night, and near the mountains stood the Quo Vadis New Testament Temple Counter Zodiaci. A carriage arrived, and several men gathered. The bald man spread his hands, and with a smile mentioned that it had been a long time, and that the Pope seemed to have rejuvenated lately. The long-haired man began to show a smile, while on the other hand, the man carrying a staff noted that the bald man had become quite burly and seemed to be imbued with more divine power. In turn, the bald man replied that the long-haired man, on the contrary, had lost weight, and asked if this was due to the new concubine he had taken. The long-haired man was the Manson cult leader, Charles. Sticking out his tongue, with a smile, he explained that she was a young woman who had a husband, and that, after whispering to her about the liberation of the soul while teaching her the doctrine, she came to him of her own free will. The bald man was the cult leader, He explained with a laugh that with just a word they offered him gold or grain, and because of this there was no need for his body to move. The man wearing a hat and carrying a staff was the New World cult leader, Mani. To him, no one would dare challenge the words of God. He pulled a letter from his hat and began to read it attentively. He mentioned that the fact that the Quo Vadis New Testament had sent an invitation for a communion ceremony made him wonder if this meant they would finally recognize them as a branch. As Am's eyes shone with malice, with a smile he began to rub his hands together. The image of Saint S. Dolores came to his mind. He knew that communion was a ritual to consume bread and white wine, but symbolically it was also the act of sharing the blood and flesh of a virgin. He considered this a clear invitation to form a formal alliance. They began to walk through the area, and with a serene gaze, Charles mentioned that it was fortunate that the New Testament cultists had finally come to their senses and reached out to them. Began to ponder in silence, while on the other hand, Mani turned to them and stated that those people had always acted so nobly, but now they finally understood. They understood that they could never win against the Old Testament cultists without their funds. Just at that moment, an explosion occurred behind them. Noticing this, their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what was happening. They stopped and turned towards the direction of the explosion, trying to understand what had happened. The ground was littered with the remains of the carriage destroyed by the explosion and a corpse. As the smoke screen dissipated, a woman began to walk toward them, happy to have found them. It was none other than Ouroboros. As a powerful energy surged from her body, she stared at them intently, and an excited smile spread across her face as she wondered why so much trash was gathered in this place. In the blink of an eye, guards carrying shields and swords surrounded Ouroboros. At the same time, from a rooftop, Bekir and Dolores were watching everything. Dolores was somewhat surprised, as Ouroboros had appeared just as Bekir had said. Bekir, who was crouching beside her, began to stare intently at Ouroboros in silence. Ouroboros unsheathed her whip. Omin the others approached her, and in a curious tone asked her how she had gotten here. Showing a calm expression and a smile, she explained that she had heard a report about the appearance of the Nightblood Hound, so she came to check it out, but she had only found what she considered a gathering of stinking trash. Hearing this, their eyes widened with rage, and they couldn't help but grit their teeth hard, as they couldn't believe how that insolent bastard dared. As the moon shone high in the sky, they ordered their men to kill her immediately. Hearing the order, they drew their swords, and with a furious gaze began to charge towards her. Once they got a little closer, Ouroboros's eyes began to shine with excitement. Without wasting a single second, she decided it was time to get serious. Just before the guards could react, she moved her whip like a thunderclap, cutting the guards' bodies to pieces. The guards' blood splattered on the faces of Ohm and the others, and their eyes widened in surprise and fear. They couldn't believe she had killed the guards in a single attack. As the corpses fell from the sky, Ouroboros wiped the blood from her cheek with her finger and with a curious smile asked them if they were their leaders. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and gritted his teeth in fear, not knowing what to say. But just then, Charles extended his hand and asked her to wait, questioning how she dared to act this way in front of them. With an arrogant expression, Charles began to point his finger at her, declaring that he was the god of the Manson cult. He added that now that he thought about it, she seemed to be his type, and that if she became his 21st wife, he would make sure she avoided divine punishment. Just before Charles could finish his sentence, Ouroboros moved like a thunderclap and with a whip crack severed his head, sending it flying through the air. Noticing this, Ohm was paralyzed for fear, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with a piercing gaze, questioning with disdain how it was possible that someone who couldn't even block her attack dared to call himself a god. El-Mani began to look at the ground, and with a furious expression declared that he was not afraid of trash like her. With a determined expression, he began to point his finger at her, declaring that he would never surrender because he was the true God who had descended upon this world. Although deep down he was pissing his pants, Ouroboros threw a bottle which hit El-Mani squarely in the face, causing the liquid to make contact with his skin. With a smile, Ouroboros showed the bottle and asked that if he really was a god, nothing would happen to him, even if he touched holy water. Once the liquid made contact with El-Mani's skin, it began to burn it like acid, causing him to start writhing in pain and screaming in agony. Ouroboros turned the bottle to show the label, which had the symbol for poison. Then she put the bottle away, extended her hand, and with a cheerful smile began to walk towards Ohm, telling him that now he was the only piece of trash left. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and started to back away, begging for his life. He confessed that he was not a god or a priest, but just a cultist, a heretic. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with an excited smile, and with her so close, Ohm's eyes filled with tears and fear as he pleaded with her to please spare him. She placed her foot next to Ohm's face, revealing that she already knew. Seeing this, Ohm gritted his teeth and panicked, knowing this was not good, as a suffocating aura of energy emanated from Ouroboros's body. In an arrogant tone, she asked him what any of that mattered. Ohm began to scream like a madman, knowing he had no escape. She grew tired of all the talk and gave him what he deserved. Now the ground was filled with blood and corpses. As if nothing had happened, she began to walk through the area. Ouroboros began to carefully observe the corpses, wondering if they planned to use her in this way. She started to look at the ground and couldn't help but smile, hoping to meet him one day. Her eyes began to shine, and sticking out her tongue, she grew excited, as the only one who managed to provoke this in her was none other than the Nightblood Hound. Her thoughts were interrupted when a bright light emerged from the trees in the forest. Voices were heard shouting that they had heard a scream coming from beyond that forest, and this time they would catch her. Hearing this, she snapped out of her thoughts, turned around, felt furious, and gritted her teeth hard. Then she braced herself, and with a leap, disappeared from the place without a trace. On the ground was Ohm, who was still alive, but his body was covered in whip wounds. Writhing in pain, he began to pant heavily. Bakir stood up, and his gaze fixed on Ohm. He explained to Dolores that he would handle the interrogation, so she should find the document containing the information. Dolores began to watch Bakir attentively, in silence. He reached a hand inside his clothes, then descended near Ohm, pulled out the glowing Dicrabia pendant, and as his eyes shone, he demanded that he tell him everything he knew about the financing of these bastards. Once Ohm opened his eyes, he saw Dicrabia's glowing eye, and it made it clear that before it, even silence was useless, and that he had to tell him everything he knew. Hypnotized by the power of Dicrabia, Ohm began to spit out everything he knew, mentioning a ledger, the financing, and a top-secret document that was located under the carriage. Just then, someone noticed them in front of the temple and shouted to capture them all. Bakir stood up and turned around, while on the other hand, Dolores went on alert, her eyes filled with concern. Dolores felt afraid, and Bakir became alert. He couldn't believe they had arrived so quickly. Not long after, someone carrying
A woman with long dark hair is playfully pinching and stretching Vikir's cheeks, exclaiming with a huge smile how much she's missed her little brother. While Vikir endures this with a pained and annoyed look, his friends, Sancho, Tudor, and Piggy, watch from a distance, completely stunned. Tudor found it unbelievable that Vikir even had a family, and Piggy quietly told him that was rude. Sancho explained their confusion, noting that Vikir had never spoken about himself or his family, making the situation very strange. A flustered Tudor admitted he didn't even know why he was so shocked. The woman continued her overly affectionate act, leaning in very close to Vikir's face and asking if they should share a kiss after being apart for so long. Once Vikir's friends had left, the mood in the room changed completely. Vikir and the woman sat alone at a table. The act now over, he said it seemed everyone was finally gone. The woman, looking tired, rested her head in her hand and said she knew she had to come in person because the message was important. She suddenly winced in pain as an image flashed, showing her face split with Cindy Windy's, showing a red bump on her forehead. The woman complained that no brother in the world would hit his visiting older sister for showing a little affection. However, she quickly added that it was necessary to overact so much to remove any suspicion others might have about their relationship. She then sat back with her legs crossed, looking arrogant, and said he should be grateful she even bothered to visit him. Bakir cut the small talk short, telling her that was enough. He became serious and asked her directly how the trade with the natives of the sea was going. The woman's attitude immediately turned professional as well. She reported that things were going smoothly and that they had already completed 3 large trades. Vikir simply replied that it was good news. Following their business discussion, Vikir's expression turned serious as he began to ask another question. With his red eye glowing, he asked Cindy Windy if there was any news on the whereabouts of the Balak tribe. Cindy Windy closed her eyes and solemnly shook her head, telling him they still hadn't been able to find them. She explained that the tribe used to appear for every trade, but now they had vanished completely. She assured Vikir that they were actively tracking them, while Vikir listened in silence. Vikir considered this information, thinking that something must have happened to the Balak tribe. An image of their powerful, white-haired leader eyes came to his mind. He believed that with such an outstanding leader, he probably didn't need to worry too much about them. Changing the subject, Cindy Windy then presented a large bag to Vikir. She explained that, as he requested, the bag contained war funds. When opened, the bag was revealed to be overflowing with shining gold coins. With that business done, Cindy Windy's expression grew grim. She told Vikir there was one last thing he needed to know. She then revealed the identity of their main target, the head of the Bourgeois family, a stern, bearded man named Bartholomew de Bourgeois. With her hands clasped and her own red eyes glowing with intensity, Cindy Windy delivered the critical information. Bartholomew is the demon.
Upon hearing that Bartholomew de Bourgeois is the demon, Bakir clasped his hands and processed the information. He had suspected that the one corrupting Quo Vadis, one of the 7 great families of the empire, would either be the family head or a very close aide. While he had expected this, having it confirmed directly made the weight of the situation feel much heavier. Cindy Wendy continued, reminding Bakir that, as he knew, the Bourgeois family was the wealthiest in the entire empire. She warned him that even if he wanted to make contact with them, the bag of gold she had brought would be far from enough to get them to even look his way. She offered to bring more funds if he needed them, but Bakir calmly said that this amount would be enough as seed money. Confused, Cindy Wendy questioned what he meant by seed money. Bakir explained that one cannot simply make contact with the bourgeois family just by having a lot of money. They are only interested when the method of earning the money is interesting. Only then will they pay any attention. A sly grin spread across Bakir's face as he told her what he planned to do with the money. He revealed his target, the mock investment tournament, an event hosted by the bourgeois family themselves. Holding up a flyer for the competition, Bakir confidently declared his plan to use his knowledge to win the tournament. Hearing this, Cindy Wendy's face twisted in absolute shock, blue lightning crackling around her. She screamed that he was insane, shouting that his plan was nothing short of fraud. The scene shifts to a large, grand building at night. Inside a dimly lit office, a man with long, wavy blue hair named Venzimorg has been called. He enters and asks if he was summoned. The person who called him is a powerfully built man with long blonde hair holding a large, ornate sword. This is Winston Smith, the principal of Colosseo Academy. Venzimorg looks slightly surprised as his eyes fall upon the principal's weapon. He recognizes it as Owl, the Sword of Winter, and notes that since the principal is still armed, he must have just arrived. Venzi thinks about the principal's reputation as a legendary swordsman, a figure whose power was said to match the heads of the most powerful warrior families in the empire. Principal Smith smiles and motions for Venzi to take a seat, saying that his time off ended sooner than expected. Once they are seated, the principal gets straight to the point, asking about the trouble he's heard Professor Sadie has been causing in his absence. Venzi's expression turns to pure anger. He begins listing her offenses, which he claims are too many to even mention in full. He mentions her poor work ethic, her habit of drinking during class, and even attacking students. Leaning forward in frustration, Venzi declares that, to be frank, Sadie isn't a professor, but a criminal who belongs in the notorious Nouvelle Vague prison. The principal raises a hand to calm Venzi down, telling him not to be so harsh, though his own smile seems a bit forced. He then gives some context for Sadie's behavior. He explains that she's the last descendant of the Marquis de Sade, a family that was incredibly infamous before the empire's unification. The principal adds that the previous head of the Sade family is, in fact, currently imprisoned in Nouvelle Vague. Principal Smith addressed Venzi, stating that he still believed there was a good side to everyone, and that this must also be true for Professor Sadie. Venzi, clearly frustrated and thinking the principal was being naive, warned him that the final exams and parent-teacher conferences were fast approaching. He insisted that if Sadie caused problems again, as she did during the midterms, the situation would become completely unmanageable. The principal's solution was simple. He instructed Venzi to exclude her from any practical duties and to keep her out of the public eye as much as possible. Internally, Venzi was fuming with frustration, realizing that the principal had no intention of even considering disciplinary action or dismissal for Sadie. Standing up stiffly, Venzi curtly acknowledged the principal's decision, saying that if that's what he wanted, then it would be done. He then stated that since there was nothing left to discuss, he would take his leave. Venzi turned and walked out of the office, leaving Principal Smith sitting alone in the moonlight, thinking about the situation in silence. The scene shifts to a meeting of the Oracle Mock Investment Club. Piggy rushes in excitedly, holding a large stack of papers, and reports to Dolores that he has gathered all the requested information on the personal details and recent activities of the young masters of the bourgeois family. Meanwhile, Sinclair stands proudly before a chalkboard, announcing that she has completed a perfect analysis of the schedule, system, and structure of the upcoming mock investment tournament. Standing at the head of the table, Dolores, the club's vice president, praises them both for excellent work. A determined glint appears in her eye.
The story flashes back to a secret meeting between Dolores and Bakir, who is disguised as the Night Hound, stunned by the bag of gold coins on the table between them. Dolores asked where he could have possibly gotten so much, and Bakir reminded her that he had mentioned having a very rich friend. He explained that their plan was to use this seed money to earn even more, which would attract the attention of the bourgeois family's leadership. He told her that since he couldn't act in his own identity, it was her role to grow this fortune. He assured her that he would instruct her on the methods for making money later. Bakir had one additional instruction for her. He told her to find 2 capable individuals to handle the clerical, administrative, and other secretarial work so they could proceed with their plan smoothly. Returning to the present, Dolores looks at Piggy and Sinclair, the very people she recruited for this task after they beat out numerous other competitors. She overhears them bickering, with Sinclair correcting Piggy that they beat exactly 108 applicants. A wave of guilt and determination washes over Dolores. She clenches her fist, knowing that these innocent students have no idea they are preparing for a battle against a demon, though she has already put plans in place to protect them from the fallout. She resolves to keep them safe. Piggy then approaches the table and asks a very practical question. He points out that since the mock investment tournament is just a simulation, he wonders why they need real seed money. Leaning forward with a confident, almost mischievous smile, Dolores begins to explain. She reveals that it's because they're going to be making real investments. The revelation leaves both Piggy and Sinclair utterly speechless and shouting in shock. Dolores passionately declared their dual goal. Not only would they win the mock investment tournament, but they would also make a massive financial profit in the process. With a confident smile, she announced that she would take full responsibility for any negative consequences, though she privately knew that the Night Hound was the one truly taking the risk. Piggy and Sinclair huddled together, whispering nervously. Piggy worriedly asked if their vice president could be planning to scam them, but Sinclair quickly dismissed the idea, saying she didn't believe Dolores was that kind of person. After a moment, they turned back to Dolores with bright, trusting smiles. They declared that since she was so determined, they would follow her completely. They even admitted that the idea of using real money sounded much more exciting. Internally, Dolores was filled with gratitude for their unwavering trust. Feeling optimistic, Piggy suggested they should ask his young Bakir to join them. Sinclair immediately agreed, pointing out that having Bakir on their team would be a huge help. The mention of Bakir's name caught Dolores completely off guard, causing a bead of sweat to trickle down her face as she became visibly flustered. Piggy explained that Bakir had recently shown a keen interest in economics, reading the newspaper every morning, and added that Bakir was the kind of reassuring friend who brought a sense of calm just by being present. After a moment of thought, Dolores turned away slightly and asked Piggy to pass a message to Bakir the next time he saw him, an invitation to join their club. While Piggy seemed a little hesitant, Sinclair was overjoyed, pumping her fists and cheering at the idea. Piggy then noticed something about Dolores' expression, remarking that it looked familiar. He recalled that she had the exact same look on her face when she had come to their dorm looking for Bakir some time ago. As if prompted by the memory, Dolores turned and began walking away down a sunlit corridor. She told them to finish organizing the materials and head home, explaining that she had something to take care of and was leaving ahead of them. Sinclair watched her go, a hint of concern on her face. As Dolores walked alone down a sunlit corridor, her mind was completely filled with thoughts of Bakir. She recalled all the times she had wanted to speak with him, but couldn't find the words. She remembered when he asked to name the scholarship after Perry, and how she wished she could have talked with him about it, since he was there for Perry's final moments. She also thought of the time he fought on her behalf, and how he had supported her during the student council election. She realized she had always wanted to simply thank him. Thinking back, she recognized there had been so many opportunities to have a real conversation with him, from their time in the northern forests to the battle against the demon Andromalis, but she had failed to take any of them. She admitted to herself that whenever she was in front of him, she became flustered and couldn't speak properly. Even when she was with the mysterious night hound, her thoughts would inevitably drift back to Bakir. Steeling her resolve, she wondered if today would finally be the day she could say what she needed to say. Her thoughts were interrupted when she found herself standing directly in front of Bakir, who looked surprised to see her and asked what was wrong. Taking a deep breath and looking down for a moment to gather her courage, Dolores began to speak his name. Then, with a blush on her cheeks and a look of pure determination in her eyes, she looked directly at him and announced loudly that she had something she needed to tell him. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
It was night, and near the mountains stood the Quo Vadis New Testament Temple Cauter Zodiaci. A carriage arrived, and several men gathered. The bald man spread his hands, and with a smile mentioned that it had been a long time, and that the Pope seemed to have rejuvenated lately. The long-haired man began to show a smile, while on the other hand, the man carrying a staff noted that the bald man had become quite burly and seemed to be imbued with more divine power. In turn, the bald man replied that the long-haired man, on the contrary, had lost weight, and asked if this was due to the new concubine he had taken. The long-haired man was the Manson cult leader, Charles. Sticking out his tongue, with a smile, he explained that she was a young woman who had a husband, and that, after whispering to her about the liberation of the soul while teaching her the doctrine, she came to him of her own free will. The bald man was the cult leader, He explained with a laugh that, with just a word, they offered him gold or grain, and because of this, there was no need for his body to move. The man wearing a hat and carrying a staff was the New World cult leader, El-Mani. To him, no one would dare challenge the words of God. He pulled a letter from his hat and began to read it attentively. He mentioned that the fact that the Quo Vadis New Testament had sent an invitation for a communion ceremony made him wonder if this meant they would finally recognize them as a branch. As Am's eyes shone with malice, with a smile, he began to rub his hands together. The image of Saint S. Dolores came to his mind. He knew that communion was a ritual to consume bread and white wine, but symbolically it was also the act of sharing the blood and flesh of a virgin. He considered this a clear invitation to form a formal alliance. They began to walk through the area, and with a serene gaze, Charles mentioned that it was fortunate that the New Testament cultists had finally come to their senses and reached out to them. Began to ponder in silence, while on the other hand, El-Mani turned to them and stated that those people had always acted so nobly, but now they finally understood. They understood that they could never win against the Old Testament cultists without their funds. Just at that moment, an explosion occurred behind them. Noticing this, their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what was happening. They stopped and turned towards the direction of the explosion, trying to understand what had happened. The ground was littered with the remains of the carriage destroyed by the explosion and a corpse. As the smoke screen dissipated, a woman began to walk toward them, happy to have found them. It was none other than Ouroboros. As a powerful energy surged from her body, she stared at them intently, and an excited smile spread across her face as she wondered why so much trash was gathered in this place. In the blink of an eye, guards carrying shields and swords surrounded Ouroboros. At the same time, from a rooftop, Bakir and Dolores were watching everything. Dolores was somewhat surprised, as Ouroboros had appeared just as Bakir had said. Bakir, who was crouching beside her, began to stare intently at Ouroboros in silence. Ouroboros unsheathed her whip. Omin the others approached her, and in a curious tone asked her how she had gotten here. Showing a calm expression and a smile, she explained that she had heard a report about the appearance of the Nightblood Hound. So she came to check it out, but she had only found what she considered a gathering of stinking trash. Hearing this, their eyes widened with rage, and they couldn't help but grit their teeth hard, as they couldn't believe how that insolent bastard dared. As the moon shone high in the sky, they ordered their men to kill her immediately. Hearing the order, they drew their swords, and with a furious gaze began to charge towards her. Once they got a little closer, Ouroboros's eyes began to shine with excitement. Without wasting a single second, she decided it was time to get serious. Just before the guards could react, she moved her whip like a thunderclap, cutting the guards' bodies to pieces. The guards' blood splattered on the faces of Ohm and the others, and their eyes widened in surprise and fear. They couldn't believe she had killed the guards in a single attack. As the corpses fell from the sky, Ouroboros wiped the blood from her cheek with her finger, and with a curious smile asked them if they were their leaders. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and gritted his teeth in fear, not knowing what to say. But just then, Charles extended his hand and asked her to wait, questioning how she dared to act this way in front of them. With an arrogant expression, Charles began to point his finger at her, declaring that he was the god of the Manson cult. He added that now that he thought about it, she seemed to be his type, and that if she became his 21st wife, he would make sure she avoided divine punishment. Just before Charles could finish his sentence, Ouroboros moved like a thunderclap, and with a whip crack, severed his head, sending it flying through the air. Noticing this, Ohm was paralyzed for fear, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with a piercing gaze, questioning with disdain how it was possible that someone who couldn't even block her attack dared to call himself a god. El-Mani began to look at the ground, and with a furious expression declared that he was not afraid of trash like her. With a determined expression, he began to point his finger at her, declaring that he would never surrender because he was the true God who had descended upon this world. Although deep down he was pissing his pants, Ouroboros threw a bottle which hit El-Mani squarely in the face, causing the liquid to make contact with his skin. With a smile, Ouroboros showed the bottle and asked that if he really was a god, nothing would happen to him, even if he touched holy water. Once the liquid made contact with El-Mani's skin, it began to burn it like acid, causing him to start writhing in pain and screaming in agony. Ouroboros turned the bottle to show the label, which had the symbol for poison. Then she put the bottle away, extended her hand, and with a cheerful smile began to walk towards Ohm, telling him that now he was the only piece of trash left. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and started to back away, begging for his life. He confessed that he was not a god or a priest, but just a cultist, a heretic. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with an excited smile, and with her so close, Ohm's eyes filled with tears and fear as he pleaded with her to please spare him. She placed her foot next to Ohm's face, revealing that she already knew. Seeing this, Ohm gritted his teeth and panicked, knowing this was not good, as a suffocating aura of energy emanated from Ouroboros's body. In an arrogant tone, she asked him what any of that mattered. Ohm began to scream like a madman, knowing he had no escape. She grew tired of all the talk and gave him what he deserved. Now the ground was filled with blood and corpses. As if nothing had happened, she began to walk through the area. Ouroboros began to carefully observe the corpses, wondering if they planned to use her in this way. She started to look at the ground and couldn't help but smile, hoping to meet him one day. Her eyes began to shine, and sticking out her tongue, she grew excited, as the only one who managed to provoke this in her was none other than the Nightblood Hound. Her thoughts were interrupted when a bright light emerged from the trees in the forest. Voices were heard shouting that they had heard a scream coming from beyond that forest, and this time they would catch her. Hearing this, she snapped out of her thoughts, turned around, felt furious, and gritted her teeth hard. Then she braced herself, and with a leap, disappeared from the place without a trace. On the ground was Ohm, who was still alive, but his body was covered in whip wounds. Writhing in pain, he began to pant heavily. Bakir stood up, and his gaze fixed on Ohm. He explained to Dolores that he would handle the interrogation, so she should find the document containing the information. Dolores began to watch Bakir attentively, in silence. He reached a hand inside his clothes, then descended near Ohm, pulled out the glowing Dicrabia pendant, and as his eyes shone, he demanded that he tell him everything he knew about the financing of these bastards. Once Ohm opened his eyes, he saw Dicrabia's glowing eye, and it made it clear that before it, even silence was useless, and that he had to tell him everything he knew. Hypnotized by the power of Dicrabia, Ohm began to spit out everything he knew, mentioning a ledger, the financing, and a top-secret document that was located under the carriage. Just then, someone noticed them in front of the temple and shouted to capture them all. Bakir stood up and turned around, while on the other hand, Dolores went on alert, her eyes filled with concern. Dolores felt afraid, and Bakir became alert. He couldn't believe they had arrived so quickly. Not long after, someone carrying a...
Bakir stared back at Dolores, his red eyes wide with surprise. Dolores, blushing but determined, began to speak, telling Bakir that there was something she needed to confess to him. Just as she was about to continue, Bakir suddenly cut her off, asking her to wait a moment. Before she could react, Bakir closed the distance between them and told her to please stay still, which startled her. Now standing face to face, Dolores's heart began to pound in her chest as she blushed, wondering why he was so close when she hadn't even said anything yet. His hand moved, and he gently patted her on the head. Confused but flustered, Dolores closed her eyes, wondering what he was doing. The real reason for his action was then revealed. As Bakir pulled his hand away, he was holding the pendant Decorabia with the terrified little spider clinging to it. Both were sweating, having been caught hiding in Dolores's hair. The mood turned menacing as Bakir glared down at his two demonic items, furiously thinking what they were doing there and silently cursing Decorabia. The little spider, shaking in fear, tried to explain that it was just sightseeing with the perverted spider, trying to blame Decorabia. Bakir's expression grew even darker as he made a silent, chilling promise to deal with both of them once they were back in his room. Unaware of this silent drama, Dolores saw Bakir's dark expression and quietly called out to him by name. Bakir quickly hid the pendant and spider behind his back and turned to her with a neutral expression. He explained that there was a bug on her head and he was just removing it, apologizing if he made her uncomfortable. A flustered Dolores touched her hair and told him it was okay, thanking him before trying to remember what she was about to say. After Bakir asked what she wanted to say, Dolores's courage completely disappeared and she blushed intensely, panicking. She threw her hands up and insisted it was nothing strange. Internally scolding herself for almost confessing her feelings, she quickly changed the subject, asking if he was interested in the mock investment tournament. Bakir calmly asked if she meant the upcoming competition. Still flustered, Dolores confirmed that she, Piggy, and Sinclair had formed a club to participate and timidly invited him to join. However, Bakir politely declined. He explained that, besides his newspaper duties, he simply didn't have time for other club activities. Dolores was visibly disappointed. Saying he had to leave, Bakir turned and began to walk away, still holding the troublesome pendant and spider behind his back. Dolores tried to act cheerful, waving goodbye and telling him to take care. They began to walk in opposite directions. Just as they were about to part, Bakir called out to Dolores, making her stop in surprise. He turned back slightly and wished her good luck in the competition. This unexpected encouragement caught Dolores completely off guard, and she blushed even more deeply, stammering a quiet thank you as she touched her hair in a flustered but happy way. The story jumps forward 2 weeks. In the grand courtyard of a building, Dolores, Piggy, and Sinclair are standing in a room completely surrounded by huge stacks of shining gold coins. They are speechless, shocked, and in disbelief. Piggy exclaims that it's the first time he has ever seen so much money and praises Dolores, wondering how she achieved this in such a short time. Dolores herself is just as stunned, thinking that she never imagined the money-making method taught to her by the Night Hound would be this successful. The scene then flashes back 2 weeks, showing the secret meeting between Dolores and the Night Hound. He explained his plan to her. The first step was to select 960 gullible investors. The second step was to divide that group in half. To the first 480 people, they would send a prediction that a specific investment would rise. To the other 480 people, they would send the opposite prediction. The third step was a process of elimination, as one prediction would be correct. They were to take the group that received the correct information and repeat the process, split them, send conflicting predictions, and get rid of the group that received the wrong one. They were to continue this for 5 days until only a small group of 30 people remained. The Night Hound explained that those who got the wrong predictions would lose faith, leaving only a core group of believers. To these final 30 people, it would seem as if the Oracle Club's predictions were perfect. He predicted that once this was done, they wouldn't even have to look for investors. Word of their perfect track record would spread, and people would come to them, begging to have their money invested, which is exactly what happened. The Night Hound's final instruction to Bakir was to gather all the money from these investors, along with the seed money he had provided, and invest every last coin into the Singdi Wendy Merchant Group. At the time, Dolores was deeply concerned, questioning the idea of putting such a huge sum into a single venture. She pointed out the immense risk, worrying that if the investment failed, the financial losses would be huge and the investors would turn against them. The scene returns to the flashback, with the Night Hound confidently addressed Dolores' concerns. With his red eyes glowing, he assured her that he personally vouched for the business skills of the person in charge of the Singdi Wendy Merchant Group. He predicted that the investment would yield an unbelievable amount of profit. Back in the present day, Dolores stood in stunned silence, still trying to process the incredible outcome of his plan. While she was lost in thought, Piggy and Sinclair were gleefully playing in the mountains of gold, making money angels. Watching them, Dolores couldn't help but wonder about the true extent of the Night Hound's mysterious abilities. Later that night, under a full moon, Dolores, now dressed in a simple nightgown, cautiously opened a window on a high rooftop. Peeking out, she saw the person she was waiting for and confirmed that the Night Hound had arrived for their meeting. He stood against the moon, saying he was a little late. Dolores smiled, explaining that she was also delayed because she had to avoid being seen. They sat together on the rooftop. Dolores asked if he had any trouble finding this specific unmarked location. The Night Hound replied that it wasn't very difficult for him. His easy answer sparked a sudden suspicion in Dolores' mind. She wondered how he could have known the exact meeting spot unless he was somehow connected to the academy. Secretly, she pulled out a small, ornate item, the Mirror of Truth, which could reveal the true face of anyone reflected in it. For a moment, she considered using it to uncover his identity. However, she quickly decided against it. She resolved to trust him, believing that he would eventually tell her who he was when he was ready. With that thought, she put the mirror away. Sitting on the rooftop, the Night Hound got straight to business, asking Dolores about the outcome of their investment plan. Dolores reported with great excitement that it had been a massive success. She expressed her amazement, admitting she never realized he was not only a skilled fighter, but also an exceptional investor. The Nighthound stood up and looked out over the moonlit academy, declaring that only the final stage remained before their decisive battle. Dolores, still seated, asked what he meant by the final stage. He explained that to attack the secretly operating bourgeois family, they would need to recruit an insider, someone who could be their key to unlocking the family's secrets. The person they needed, he specified, had to be someone in a key position within the family, but also against the current family head, Bartholomew. Dolores was skeptical, pointing out that anyone in such a high position would likely be treated very well and would have no reason to be an enemy of the family head. She questioned if such a person even existed. In response, the Nighthound simply handed her a rolled-up newspaper. As they both looked at it, Dolores noted that it was a very old issue of a financial paper. She began to read an article about the succession conflict within the bourgeois family. The article stated that the most likely successor at the time was the eldest son, Bartholomew. As she continued reading, her eyes widened in surprise as she came across another name. The Nighthound explained that this person was a silver medalist in the family's game of succession. He had tried for the position of family head, but ultimately lost. This person was the second son, Damien de Bourgeois, who currently serves as the director of the Imperial Mint. The Nighthound reasoned that while Damien's political defeat had weakened his influence within the family, his current position was more than enough to make him a powerful insider. Upon hearing the name, Dolores recognized him, explaining that he was the one who had overseen the bourgeois family's quest during the second round of the University League. She was shocked to learn he once fought his brother for control of the family. Finally, she turned to the Nighthound and asked the most important question: how were they going to make contact with director Damien? The scene shifts to a grand celebration taking place in the city at night, with a spectacular fireworks display lighting up the sky. Inside a lavishly decorated hall, guests are arriving in elegant attire. The sound of their formal shoes echoes on the polished floor as wine glasses cling together in cheerful toasts. The grand ballroom is filled with high society guests mingling and enjoying the extravagant feast. Leaning against a golden railing and observing the lively event is Dolores. She is dressed beautifully. A light blue ball gown, her hair styled up in a rose choker around her neck. She looks slightly flushed and overwhelmed as she takes in the bustling scene, acknowledging to herself that she has arrived at the party. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
The night sky above a grand estate was filled with the bright explosions of colorful fireworks, showing a major celebration was happening. Inside the fancy ballroom, a string quartet played elegant music as high society guests mingled, danced, and enjoyed the party. To get the crowd's attention, someone tapped a spoon against a wine glass, the clear sound ringing through the hall. The guests all turned their attention to a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Standing there were Piggy and Sinclair, the hosts of the party. A visibly nervous and sweating Piggy began to speak, introducing them as members of the Oracle Club. Shaking with stage fright, Piggy stammered through a thank you to all the guests for coming. He then announced that their club's vice president, Dolores, would give the official welcoming speech. The three of them stood together, looking down at the crowd of expectant faces filling the ballroom below. Dolores took a moment to calm herself with a deep breath. Stepping forward with confidence, she placed a hand over her heart and gracefully began her speech. Once again, offering a sincere thank you to everyone for joining them on this special occasion. Continuing her speech from the balcony, Dolores explained to the crowd that they saw the party as a precious chance to personally greet the respected seniors of the financial world. As she spoke, she clasped her hands together and a bright golden light began to shine from them. A display of her divine power. She finished her speech with a sincere wish, hoping that the connections made that evening would not be short-lived, but would grow into lasting relationships. The golden light washed over the entire ballroom, bathing the guests in its warm, holy glow. They all looked up in complete awe, totally captivated by the powerful blessing. One guest, looking up with an amazed expression, said to his friend that this must be the legendary blessing of the saintess. Noting how truly dazzling it was, unseen by the enchanted crowd, another person moved silently through the party. It was Vakir, perfectly disguised as a waiter with a masquerade mask covering the top half of his face. He carried a tray of wine glasses, his expression unreadable as he watched the scene he and Dolores had so carefully planned. The story flashes back to the conversation between Dolores and the Night Hound on the moonlit rooftop, revealing how the grand party came to be. Upon hearing his plan, Dolores had exclaimed in shock, "A party?" The Night Hound confirmed it, telling her to host a luxurious party and send invitations to all the wealthy elites of the empire. With Damien de Bourgeois being a key guest, he assured her that since rumors about the Oracle Club's incredible success had already spread through the financial world, their reputation would guarantee that the invitations were taken seriously. Dolores, however, was still worried about the practical side of things, asking how they could possibly afford such an expensive event. A look of realization came over her face as she looked at him, and he confirmed her unspoken. The Night Hound explained that the profits from their investment were so huge that even after paying back all their investors with large dividends, they would have more than enough money left to cover the party's costs. With the financial worries taken care of, a new anxiety took hold of Dolores. She clasped her hands nervously, her expression filled with self-doubt. She looked down and quietly asked if she would truly be able to successfully host a party filled with such powerful and important people. Looking at her, the Night Hound offered a simple reassurance. He told her that he, of course, planned to sneak into the party as well. Her eyes widened in surprise and relief. He stood up, explaining that he needed to be there in order to make contact with Damien. Hearing that he would be there with her, Dolores's confidence was completely restored. Her face lit up with a bright, determined smile. Clasping her hands together with new excitement, she declared that if he was going to be there, then she would do her best and give it her all. Back at the party, Vakir moved through the crowd, disguised as a waiter. He noted with satisfaction that despite her earlier worries, Dolores was handling her role as hostess perfectly. However, his main concern was whether their primary target had accepted the invitation. He scanned the room, which was filled with famous figures from across the empire's financial world, wondering if Damien de Bourgeois was among them. Peeking from behind a pillar, his eyes carefully looked over the guests. Soon, a small, triumphant smile touched his lips as he finally found his target. Seated in a private lounge area, sipping a glass of red wine, was the man himself, Damien de Bourgeois, the director of the Imperial Mint. Damien was discussing the party's hosts with his friends. He said that the rumors about the student investment club were true. They had not only done well in a mock tournament, but had also made a real fortune. The sheer size and luxury of the party was undeniable, proof of their success. One of the men with him commented that the students must have learned a valuable lesson about the power of money, suggesting they now understood that it could achieve anything. Another man, however, disagreed, arguing that money, while powerful, was not all powerful. He posed a rhetorical question about the things money couldn't solve. To illustrate his point, he offered an example suggesting that money couldn't, for instance, bring the dead back to life. The seemingly innocent comment had a profound effect on Damien. His expression instantly darkened, his face twisting with what looked like deep pain or anger, and he gripped his wine glass tightly. The topic had clearly hit a deep and personal nerve. The casual remark about not being able to bring the dead back to life struck Damien with immense force. His hand trembled, splashing the wine in his glass, and his friends looked on in shock at his sudden, strong reaction. Without a word, he abruptly stood up to leave. Confused, one of the men asked where Director Damien was going. Trying to compose himself, Damien turned his back to them and gave a short excuse, explaining that he felt a bit warm from the wine and was just stepping outside for some fresh air. As he walked away, his friends were left confused, wondering what they could have possibly said to cause such a dark expression to cross his face. From a distance, Viker, still in his waiter disguise, had watched the entire exchange. He saw his opportunity. Damien sought refuge on a quiet balcony, standing alone under the full moon, clearly trying to calm the painful memories the conversation had stirred up. His solitude was soon broken by a voice from behind him. It was the masked waiter, Viker, who had followed him. He stepped out of the shadows and posed a direct question, asking if the director truly believed there were things in the world that money could not do. Damien turned to face the masked waiter, questioning why he would ask such a philosophical question at that particular time and place. Viker offered a polite apology for disturbing him, explaining that he had simply found the earlier conversation about the limits of money to be very interesting. Viker then answered his own question, stating that there are indeed things money can't do. Damien, looking up from the balcony railing, agreed strongly, adding that there were a great many such things. He explained his philosophy, stating that money was merely a tool to achieve a goal. He looked up at the sky and said that the things money couldn't accomplish were as numerous as the stars, and that this limitation was part of what defined humanity. Seemingly ending the conversation, Damien walked past Viker and placed a hand on his shoulder in a clear warning. He advised the waiter that eavesdropping was a dangerous hobby for someone of his station, and that learning to hold his tongue was key to a long life. As Damien turned to leave, Viker stopped him with one final mysterious question. He asked, "Of all the countless stars representing things money can't buy, which one was the most distant and the brightest?" Viker's red eyes seemed to glow as he delivered his devastating final line. He suggested that the brightest, most impossible star was perhaps the chance to meet one's dead daughter. The word struck Damien with the force of a physical blow, his face twisting in pure shock and horror, revealing that Viker had just exposed his deepest and most painful secret. Enraged and his face twisted with fury, Damien declared that the masked waiter clearly didn't understand words. He drew his ornate sword, stating that as payment for his rudeness, he would take one of his arms. With a furious cry, Damien lunged forward, swinging his sword with deadly intent. However, Viker met the attack with shocking ease. A glowing red dagger appeared in his hand, and he effortlessly deflected the sword strike. Much to Damien's disbelief, holding the demonic-looking blade, Viker calmly and pointedly asked his question again. "Don't you want to meet your daughter, Damien?" Pushed past his breaking point, Damien snarled. Realizing his opponent had no fear of death, he unleashed his own power, and his sword transformed into a serrated, chainsaw-like blade of pure golden energy, which he brought down with immense force. But the attack was useless. With a single powerful swing of his red dagger, Viker completely shattered Damien's weapon. The force of the impact sent Damien staggering back, his face a mask of sweat and utter shock, utterly defeated and overwhelmed. He demanded to know the true identity of this mysterious and impossibly strong waiter. Standing confidently under the full moon, his red dagger glowing with ominous power, Viker revealed himself. He declared that he was the Night Hound, and he had come to make a deal with Damien. This video ends. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Under the full moon, the Night Hound made his offer clear. He told Damien J. Bourgeois that he had come to make him a deal he couldn't refuse. He then revealed the core of his offer. He would make it possible for Damien to meet his deceased daughter, Juliette J. Bourgeois. Damien, however, was not convinced as the Night Hound expected. He said that while he didn't know how a criminal could arrange a meeting with the dead, the Night Hound was wrong about one key fact. With a look of pained certainty, Damien declared that his daughter was... This news caught the Cure completely by surprise. His information from Cindy Windy had been clear. Juliette died in a carriage accident at a young age. He knew that in a situation this tense, Damien would have no reason to lie. Seeing the Night Hound's confusion, Damien let his broken sword fall to the ground. He confirmed that he was not lying and decided there was no longer any need for secrets, offering to tell his story. He began by reciting the Bourgeois family motto, "To be, not to be seen." He explained that the family's tragedy began with this belief, which was central to their succession trial. Damien described the unique trial of the Bourgeois family. To become the true successor, a candidate must have their family name and status hidden and go out into the world as a commoner. They must succeed using only their own skills, a tradition meant to prevent them from becoming spoiled nobles who relied on their family name. He explained that both he and his brother, Bartholomew, each had one daughter, and both girls were sent into society with their identities hidden to undergo this trial. He spoke of his own daughter, Juliet, with great pride, recalling his complete faith in her exceptional talent. Even after he had lost the fight for succession against his brother, he believed that Juliet would succeed and rise to the very top of the family. However, his expression turned to one of pain as he remembered how those hopes were cruelly broken. He recalled the day Juliet came to him in desperation. During her time as a commoner, she had fallen in love with a man of low birth named Romeo. She begged her father to help pay for Romeo's hospital bills, willing to give up her position as a successor to save the man she loved. Damien described Romeo as a man with nothing, no background, no talent, and no future. His only good quality was that he was kind and friendly to everyone, regardless of their status. Continuing his story on the moonlit balcony, Damien recalled his reaction to his daughter's plea. He confessed that at that moment he was filled with rage. He felt that this worthless man, Romeo, had ruined the daughter he had so carefully raised to restore his own honor. As Juliet continued to beg him to save Romeo's life, promising that the boy would soon die without treatment, Damien's anger only grew. In a cold fury, he ordered his men to drag Romeo away. Juliet screamed in protest, trying to stop them, but she was powerless as they hauled the sick man away. Damien recounted that it all came to a climax on a rainy day. In front of a weeping Juliet, Damien had Romeo brutally beaten, believing that such a harsh lesson would force her to come to her senses. Standing over them in the rain, Damien coldly told his daughter to stop her foolishness. He told her that because of her irresponsible actions, she had been stripped of her status as a successor and would now have to live her life as a failure. But Juliet did not break. Kneeling in the rain beside the man she loved, she looked up at her father and told him that Romeo was precious to her. He was the first person who had ever made her truly happy and seen her for who she was, not as a tool for her father's honor. With tears streaming down her face, her sadness turned to pure rage. She accused her father of cruelly destroying the one good thing in her life. Damien recalled his deep shock at seeing such an expression on his daughter's face for the first time, a look of genuine, deep-seated hatred. The most devastating part was realizing that all of that hatred was directed at him. In that moment of defiance, Juliet helped Romeo into a carriage and fled into the storm, leaving as if she never intended to return. Snapping out of his shock, Damien sent his mounted guards after them. And it was then, he explained, that the accident happened. In the chaos of the storm, the horses were startled by thunder. On the slippery, rain-slicked road, the carriage lost control and crashed violently. Damien revealed that his daughter survived the wreck without a single scratch. Romeo had shielded her with his own body, sacrificing his life to save hers. When Juliet awoke after the accident and learned that Romeo was dead, the shock was too much for her to bear. She fainted from the grief and, as Damien finished his tragic story, he revealed that she has been in a coma ever since, never waking.
Overwhelmed by sadness and desperation, Damien clutched his head in pain. He cried out that he had already tried everything he could think of to wake his daughter, from medicine and poisons to even holy power, but every single attempt had failed. With tears in his eyes, he confessed that he would give anything, his entire fortune, everything he had, just for the chance to see Juliet's smiling face one more time and offer her a sincere apology for what he had done. Seizing the moment of absolute weakness, the Night Hound stepped forward. He asked that if he could provide the means for Damien to apologize to his daughter, would Damien truly be willing to give everything he had to him? Seeing the tears streaming down the broken man's face, it was clear the offer had hit its mark. The scene shifts forward 1 month to a large candlelit room in Damien de Bourgeois' mansion. Damien stood with the Night Hound before a large bed, explaining that this was the place. On the bed, surrounded by a sea of white and pink flowers, lay a beautiful young woman with long white hair. Damien introduced her as his daughter, Juliet J. Bourgeois, as the Night Hound looked at the comatose young woman. He found her face to be strangely familiar. Just then, Damien turned to him with a questioning look. He asked why the Night Hound had brought a child with him, reminding him that their arrangement was supposed to be kept in the strictest confidence. From behind the Night Hound's cloak, a small girl in a witch's hat and robes timidly peeked out. It was Perry. The Night Hound placed a reassuring hand on Perry's head, causing her to blush. He explained to Damien that she was a very capable sorceress who was necessary to call forth Juliet's soul, and he personally vouched for her skills. Crouching down to Perry's level, the Night Hound encouraged her, telling her that her soul resonance ability was top level and that she just needed to show them what she could do without being afraid. Clutching a small wand, Perry nods confidently, replying that with the staff her uncle had given her, she could definitely do it. With her resolve strengthened, Perry stepped onto a stone pedestal at the foot of Juliet's bed, holding the staff given to her by her uncle. With both hands, she prepared to begin the soul-summoning ritual. As she focused, her eyes began to glow with an intense magical purple light. The candles surrounding the bed flared up with the same energy, and a powerful surge of magic erupted from her, filling the entire room with swirling purple light. The spell was a success. A glowing spiritual form began to appear from Juliet's comatose body. Damien watched in complete shock and awe as the spiritual energy took shape before him, whispering his daughter's name in disbelief. However, it was not just Juliet's soul that appeared. The spirit of Romeo materialized beside her. Damien watched, stunned, as his daughter's spirit gently rested her head against the shoulder of the man she loved. The sight of the two lovers reunited in spirit completely broke Damien. Overwhelmed by decades of guilt and regret, he collapsed to his knees. With tears streaming down his face, he confessed that he had been wrong about everything. He begged the spirits not to forgive him, calling himself a piece of trash for ignoring his daughter's feelings and trampling on their sincere love out of his own selfish pride. He told them they could resent him for the rest of his life, but through his sobs, he pleaded that Juliet still had to live, and that was why he needed to wake her up, no matter the cost. His emotional confession was suddenly interrupted by Perry. She pointed towards the two spirits and revealed a shocking truth to Damien. She explained that Juliet had the power to return to her body on her own. The reason she remained in a coma was because she was choosing not to return. Her soul had been purposefully searching for Romeo's so that they could perish together. Stunned into silence, Damien looked at the spiritual form of his daughter and asked her if what the little girl said was really true. The spirit of Juliet silently nods, confirming that she had indeed chosen to stay in a coma to be with Romeo. The truth shattered what little hope Damien had left, and he wept openly, his face a picture of utter despair and heartbreak. He was forced to confront the full weight of his actions. It was his fault that Juliet almost died, his fault that Romeo had to sacrifice himself to save her, and his fault that his daughter ultimately chose death to be reunited with the man she loved. He understood with painful clarity that he could not turn back time. No matter what he said, no matter how deeply he regretted his choices, nothing could change the tragic past. A new resolution settled over him. He realized that dwelling on his regret was useless. It was time to think about what he could do for him.
After now, in this final moment, his thoughts were spurred on by Perry, who warned that they were running out of time. She explained that while Juliet's soul had merely left her body, Romeo was truly dead and would soon have to pass on to the afterlife, as was the natural order. Looking at the two spirits, Damien finally knew what he had to do. This would be the last thing he could ever do for his daughter. As if reading his mind, the Night Hound's voice echoed, explaining that the bond between souls is eternal and does not change with the passage of time. The scene transformed into a spiritual wedding ceremony. An officiant, who appeared as a white-haired angelic version of Damien himself, began to speak to the spirits of the bride and groom. He asked Romeo and Juliet if they would accept their shared destiny, embrace each other's souls, and promise to love one another for eternity. In the spiritual space, the souls of Romeo and Juliet joined hands. Responding to the officiant's question, they both answered with a resounding and joyful yes. Their spiritual forms glowing brightly with happiness and tears of relief. Looking at each other with pure love, Juliet told Romeo she loved him, and he tearfully returned the sentiment. With a peaceful and accepting smile, the spiritual Damien, acting as both father and officiant, declared that the two were now officially husband and wife. With the ceremony complete, Juliet's spirit turned and flew into the arms of her real, grieving father, calling out to him one last time. As they embraced, she tearfully apologized to him, but also thanked him with all her heart for making a choice that was for her, a choice that would allow her to be happy. Damien held his daughter's spirit tightly, his entire body trembling with the overwhelming emotion of this final, precious moment. As the Night Hound, Perry, and the spirit of Romeo looked on, Damien gave his daughter his final blessing. He tearfully told her to be happy, insisting that she and Romeo must find happiness together in the afterlife. He then told his daughter that he loved her. As his words of love reached her, Juliet's spirit began to glow with a brilliant golden light and vanish peacefully. With her last breath, she returned his words, telling him she loved him too. Damien was left kneeling alone in the now quiet room, the echo of his daughter's voice calling for her dad, the only thing remaining. Back on the bed of flowers, the long ordeal was finally over. A serene, peaceful smile graced the face of Juliet's physical body, as her soul, finally at peace and reunited with its love, departed from the world. This video ends. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
In the dimly lit room, a heartbroken Damien knelt, gently holding his daughter Juliet's lifeless hand as tears streamed down his face. The young sorceress, Pomeranion, watched with wide, innocent eyes. Tugging on the Night Hound's cloak, she asked her uncle why that man was crying. The Night Hound quietly explained that it was likely because of a mix of gratitude, sorrow, and love. Confused, Pomeranion asked why someone would cry if they felt gratitude and love. Thinking those feelings should bring happiness, the Night Hound simply told her it was a complicated emotion she would understand as she grew older. After a moment, Damien stood up, his face still sad but with a new calm. He turned to the Night Hound and Pomeranion and offered his sincere thanks to them both. He said that thanks to them, he was able to do his duty as a father one last time. Dismissing any need for more words of thanks, he said they were not necessary. Instead, the Night Hound held out his hand, his eyes glowing through his mask. He reminded Damien that there was something he owed him. Without hesitation, Damien knelt before the Night Hound. With his head bowed, he solemnly declared his oath, promising to give everything he had to the Night Hound. Looking up, with a look of firm determination in his now purple eyes, Damien told the Night Hound to ask for anything he wanted. The Night Hound's answer was simple and chilling, as he demanded the neck of his target. With his red eye glowing with a murderous look, the Night Hound stated his one price for the favor. He wanted the head of Bartholomew, the current head of the bourgeois family. In a quiet gazebo overlooking a moonlit garden, a secret meeting took place. Damien de Bourgeois stood with the Night Hound, and our boy introduced the third person there, Dolores, who he explained was an ally who would be helping them. Damien greeted her formally as the Saintess of Quo Vadis, noting that they had not met in such a serious way since the University League quest. Dolores, shaking Damien's hand, replied that the honor was all hers. She was still in disbelief that they had actually managed to get Director Damien as their insider, secretly wondering what could have happened to make him turn against his own family head. Wasting no time, the Night Hound got straight to the point, his red eye glowing. He declared that the reason for their meeting was to create a plan for the assassination of Bartholomew, the head of the bourgeois family. Damien, his expression grim, told them that he had already made the necessary plans. He explained that he had used his trusted people within the family to spread rumors about the Oracle Club's incredible success, knowing it would catch his brother's interest. The plan was a success. As a result, he had managed to get a dinner appointment with Bartholomew himself. The word shocked Dolores. She asked if he meant that dinner, the one she had only heard about in rumors. Damien confirmed her suspicions. It was the infamous Dinner in the Vault, an exclusive and legendary experience that only the most important people in the empire were ever invited to. He began to explain the details of the vault. The bourgeois family has a bizarre vault, a massive 50-meter cube with unbreakable walls made from mithril or a similar metal. This vault is a true iron fortress, completely sealed off from the outside world by powerful anti-teleportation magic and filled with mountains of gold and priceless treasures. Finally, Damien revealed the most important piece of information and the key to their plan. Bartholomew has a strange habit. Whenever he has an important meeting or meal, he always has it alone inside this vault for exactly 1 hour. Thinking about this new information, a bead of sweat ran down Dolores's face as she realized what it meant. An entire hour, completely cut off from all outside eyes and ears, was the perfect undisturbed chance for their plan. However, she quickly raised a good point. She asked Damien why Bartholomew would ever put himself in such a risky position, questioning if he wasn't worried about being assassinated while locked alone in the vault with a guest. Damien crossed his arms, admitting that while it was a logical fear, he had strangely never seen his brother show any concern about it. Before Damien could explain more, the Night Hound interrupted with the chilling truth. He explained that Bartholomew felt no fear because he was a demon who possessed absolute power. The news stunned Damien, who began to question what he had just heard. The Night Hound interrupted him, handing him a rolled-up document. He told Damien to not worry about that for now, and to focus on the plan. The plan was for the Night Hound's team to confront Bartholomew inside the vault, while Damien's crucial role was to assist them from the outside. The Night Hound leaned in, emphasizing that Damien's part in the plan was the most important factor in ensuring Bartholomew's defeat. As Damien,
Dolores looked at the document, wondering what it was, and their expressions turned into pure, total shock. Stuttering in disbelief, Damien realized that this plan was much bigger than just the bourgeois family. Dolores came to the same horrifying conclusion. If this plan was carried out, it could bring the entire empire to ruin. The scene then shifts to the day of the dinner. The wheels of a wooden carriage creaked as it traveled along a dirt road toward the bourgeois estate. Inside, Piggy and Sinclair were talking excitedly with Dolores. Piggy was almost bouncing with joy, saying he still couldn't believe their Oracle Club had won first place in the investment tournament, and now they were on their way to have dinner with the head of the bourgeois family. He said how incredibly excited he was. He turned to Sinclair, asking if she was excited too. With a bright smile, she enthusiastically agreed. However, her happy expression soon turned a bit sad. Looking out the window, she quietly added that she wished her young friend Vicure could have come with them. Piggy looked confused, asking Sinclair why she had suddenly brought up Vicure. Sinclair explained that Vicure had once promised to visit her family's home, which surprised Piggy even more. Seeing his reaction, Sinclair quickly took it back, saying it was nothing and that she just felt a bit sad because Vicure seemed so busy lately. Piggy agreed, adding that he had also found it hard to even find time to share a meal with Vicure recently. Suddenly, as if remembering something important, Piggy's attitude changed completely. He excitedly unrolled a long scroll, proudly announcing that he had prepared a full list of questions to ask the head of the bourgeois family. He began to enthusiastically list off the topics, which ranged from serious economic questions about the empire's future to a more simple question about what the super-rich even eat for their meals. As Piggy and Sinclair chattered excitedly, completely unaware of the real reason for their visit, Dolores watched them with a quiet, sad expression. A wave of guilt washed over her as she thought about the danger she was leading her innocent friends into. She thought to herself. As their carriage pulled up to the gates of the magnificent bourgeois estate, the massive, ornate gates swung open and the three students were led inside. They walked into a lavishly decorated waiting room, their eyes wide open with awe at the sheer luxury of their surroundings. A well-dressed man with dark hair, acting as their guide, politely told them that they should wait there for a moment. After Dolores thanked him, the man bowed slightly and told them to make themselves comfortable before leaving. While waiting, Piggy and Sinclair made themselves comfortable in the fancy room. Piggy commented on how luxurious everything was, saying that the sofa alone was 100 times better than their beds back at the academy dorms. Sinclair agreed, noting how comfortable the cushions were. Then Piggy excitedly asked Sinclair if she had thought of any questions to ask the head of the bourgeois family. Sinclair replied that there was just one thing she was curious about, but she couldn't say what it was. Her quiet answer only seemed to energize Piggy more. He jumped up, arguing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to meet the wealthiest man in the empire, and that they should be trying to gain as much knowledge as possible. As her friends continued their innocent chatter, Dolores looked down, her face a mask of guilt and stress. Clenching her fist, she steeled her resolve. Unseen by the others, she discreetly took out a small vial and poured its contents, a sleeping potion, into a nearby pitcher. She knew that she had to make sure her friends were fast asleep before the dinner began, to keep them safe from the danger that was to come. Her thoughts were interrupted when Piggy suddenly wondered aloud if Bartholomew would like the gifts they had prepared. He suggested they open the boxes to make sure everything was in order. Panicked at the thought of them discovering what was really going on, Dolores lunged forward, shouting for them to wait. Piggy and Sinclair stopped, completely startled and confused by their vice president's sudden outburst. Quickly composing herself, Dolores placed a tray with 3 cups of tea on the table. She told them that she would check the gifts herself and that they should drink some tea and rest for a while. Her smile was forced, a clear sign of the immense pressure she was under, but her friends, still a bit confused, timidly agreed. A short time later, after they had finished their tea, a sudden and overwhelming wave of drowsiness washed over both Piggy and Sinclair. They began yawning and stretching, wondering why they were suddenly so sleepy, especially right before the long-awaited dinner was about to start. As the sleeping potion took hold, Dolores watched her friends with a sinister smile, a sense of relieved success. Sinclair, still fighting the effects, yawned and said she needed to get some cold water to wake herself up. Just then, the dark-haired guide returned to the room, asking if they had rested well. As he entered, Piggy finally succumbed to the potion and fell fast asleep on the sofa. The guide announced that the head of the family was waiting and it was time to go to the dining hall. Seeing the 2 unconscious students, he asked what had happened. With a nervous laugh, Dolores quickly came up with an excuse, explaining that her friends had been very nervous and tired and had fallen asleep immediately after drinking some tea. Internally, she apologized to them, knowing that this was the only way to keep them safe. She then informed the guide that she would represent their club and meet with the family head alone. The man accepted her explanation without question and agreed to lead her there at once. Dolores followed the guide down a long, sunlit corridor. Behind them, 2 workers pushed handcarts carrying the large wooden crates that contained their gifts. They finally came to a stop in a much darker, more imposing part of the mansion. Before them stood a pair of enormous, intimidating metal doors. The guide announced that this was the place. A bead of sweat trickled down Dolores's face as she stared up at the massive structure, realizing with a chill that this was the infamous vault. As the colossal doors began to creak open, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. It was as if the sheer size of the entrance was a warning, a declaration that these doors were never meant to be used by ordinary humans. As Dolores stood at the entrance of the massive vault, the guide informed her that she would have to go on alone from that point on. He added that the gifts they had brought would be placed there for safekeeping. Stealing her resolve, Dolores understood that the being she was about to face was as strange and intimidating as the very doors before her. With a final chilling wish for her to enjoy her meal, the guide stepped back as the colossal doors began to swing shut, leaving Dolores to face her fate alone. Plunged into absolute darkness, she nervously looked around the vast empty space and called out, tentatively asking if the head of the family was there. As she took a cautious step forward, her foot slipped on something scattered across the floor. With a small cry, she lost her balance and tumbled backward, landing hard on a pile of what felt like small, metallic objects. Sitting up and rubbing her sore hip, she wondered what she could have possibly tripped on in the dark. She picked up one of the objects and realized it was a gold coin. Just as she was examining it, a brilliant, blinding golden light suddenly erupted, lighting up the entire chamber. Bathed in the bright glow, Dolores could only stare in wide-eyed astonishment as the source of the light was revealed. The entire immense vault was filled with literal mountains of shimmering gold coins. In the very center of this sea of unimaginable wealth sat a single, long dining table, elegantly set for a feast. Dolores, still sitting on the floor amidst the treasure, was left utterly speechless by the breathtaking and overwhelming sight. A deep, commanding voice broke the silence, welcoming the saintess. The speaker, a large, powerfully built man with a long blonde beard and regal clothes, held a glass of red wine. He then corrected himself, addressing her instead as the representative of the Oracle Club. This was the man they had come for, Bartholomew J. Bourgeois, the head of the Bourgeois family. This video ends here. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.